The sky over New York City turned black as massive ships blocked out the sun. General Vorthak stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the primitive planet below through the viewing screen. His four eyes studied the blue and green world with cold interest. This would be another easy conquest for the Krexan Imperium for 300 years. Vorthak had led his forces across the galaxy. 47 worlds had fallen to his might. Each victory had been swift and clean. The pattern never changed. His advanced ships would arrive, demonstrate their power, and the local population would surrender within days. Those who resisted were quickly crushed by superior technology. Earth looked no different from the others. The inhabitants called themselves humans, and their technology was laughably primitive. Their fastest ships could barely leave their own atmosphere. Their weapons were crude chemical explosives. Their communications were slow and easily intercepted. Everything about them screamed weakness. Vorthak flexed his clawed hands as he gave the order to begin the invasion. Hundreds of smaller attack craft launched from his fleet. Energy beams lanced down from orbit, striking military installations with perfect precision. Within minutes, most of Earth's air defenses were destroyed. The general allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This conquest would be over before the day ended, but something strange happened in the ruins of a military base outside the city. While other human soldiers fled or surrendered, a small group continued to fight. Vorthak watched with growing curiosity as these humans used the smoking wreckage of their destroyed vehicles as cover. They fired their primitive weapons at his advanced soldiers with no hope of victory. The leader of this doomed group caught Vorthak's attention. The human was tall and lean with short brown hair and cold blue eyes. His uniform identified him as Lieutenant Colonel Jake Morrison. While his men fell around him, Morrison never stopped moving. He rolled behind debris, fired quick bursts at the alien soldiers, and somehow stayed alive when logic said he should be dead. What puzzled Vorthak was the human's behavior. Every other species they had conquered showed fear when facing overwhelming odds. They either ran or begged for mercy. But Morrison fought harder as his situation became more hopeless. When his rifle ran out of ammunition, he picked up weapons from fallen comrades. When those failed, he threw grenades with deadly accuracy. When the grenades were gone, he used a knife. The alien soldiers surrounding Morrison were elite warriors with advanced armor and energy weapons. They had conquered worlds and defeated armies. Yet this single human with primitive tools was making them nervous. Morrison moved like he had nothing to lose and everything to gain. He anticipated their movements and turned their own tactics. Against them, Vorthak leaned forward in his command chair. In 3 centuries of warfare, he had never seen anything like this. The logical response to overwhelming force was surrender. Self-preservation was the strongest instinct in every intelligent species. Yet this human seemed to have no self-preservation instinct at all. He fought as if dying in battle was preferable to living in defeat. Morrison's small team followed his example. Lisa Carter, a young woman with auburn hair, stayed at her radio despite energy bolts exploding around her position. She called in artillery strikes on alien positions even though her own location was being overrun. Ryan Knox, a stocky man with calloused hands, rigged explosives from destroyed equipment. He crawled through enemy fire to plant charges that would take out entire squads of alien soldiers. The battle should have ended quickly. Vorthak's forces had every advantage. Better armor, superior weapons, orbital support, and overwhelming numbers. Yet somehow Morrison's group held their ground for 6 hours. They turned a simple mop-up operation into a costly siege when night fell. Morrison did something that made Vorthak's blood run cold. Instead of using darkness to escape, the human launched an attack. He led his remaining soldiers in a desperate assault on the alien command post. They had no vehicles, no heavy weapons, and no chance of success. But they attacked anyway. Morrison moved through the alien lines like a ghost. He used their own confusion against them. When Krexan soldiers expected him to retreat, he advanced. When they anticipated a frontal assault, he struck from behind. His knife found gaps in their armor that should not have existed. His primitive grenades caused damage that advanced shields should have stopped by dawn. Morrison's entire unit was dead or captured. The human colonel himself was wounded and exhausted, but he had killed 30 alien soldiers and destroyed 2 armored vehicles. More importantly, he had done something no enemy had ever done before. He had made Vorthak's elite troops afraid. The general stood in his command center and studied the reports from the battle. His military analysts tried to explain what had happened. They spoke of tactical errors and equipment malfunctions, but Vorthak knew the truth. They had encountered something new and dangerous. A species that became more deadly when cornered as his forces secured the rest of Earth's major cities. Vorthak found himself thinking about Morrison. The human now sat in a detention cell, refusing to answer questions or cooperate with his captors. He stared at his guards with those cold blue eyes and waited. Not for rescue or mercy, but for another chance to fight for the first time in his long military career. General Vorthak felt something he had not experienced since childhood. Fear, not fear of human weapons or technology, but fear of what humans might be capable of when they had nothing left to lose. Morrison had shown him something terrifying. Humans did not break under pressure. They became something else entirely. The detention cells aboard Vorthak's flagship were designed to hold the most dangerous prisoners in the galaxy. Energy barriers hummed softly while automated systems monitored every breath and heartbeat. Jake Morrison sat on the metal bench and studied his surroundings with the same intensity he had shown in battle. 3 days had passed since his capture. The aliens had tried various interrogation techniques. They offered him food, threatened him with pain, and even attempted to use some kind of mind probe. Morrison had ignored them all. He was not interested in talking. He was interested in learning. Lisa Carter occupied the cell next to his. The communications specialist had been captured while trying to coordinate resistance movements across the city. Despite her injuries, she spent her time listening to the alien guards and learning their language. Her sharp mind picked up patterns in their speech that revealed important information about their technology and social structure. Ryan Knox was in the 3rd cell. The demolitions expert had been unconscious when they brought him aboard. He woke up asking questions about the ship's construction and power systems. Even as a prisoner, he could not stop thinking like an engineer. He studied the energy barriers and bulkhead design with professional interest. Morrison knew they would not remain prisoners for long. Not because he expected rescue, but because he was already planning their escape. The aliens had made a critical error. They assumed that primitive humans would be helpless without their technology. They did not understand that humans had survived for thousands of years by adapting to impossible situations. The Krexan guards followed strict routines. They changed shifts every 8 hours. They checked prisoners every 2 hours. They carried energy weapons that required specific hand positions to fire. Morrison memorized every detail. He watched how they moved, how they thought, and how they reacted to unexpected situations. What he discovered worried him more than their advanced technology. The Krexans were predictable. They followed protocols without question. When faced with a situation not covered by their training, they hesitated while consulting their data systems. They had become dependent on their computers to make decisions for them. Lisa had made similar observations about their communication systems. The aliens used complex encryption that would be impossible for humans to break. But they had built in so many safety features and backup protocols that the system was slow to adapt to changes. A creative approach might find ways around their defenses. Ryan had studied the ship's construction and reached disturbing conclusions. The Krexan vessel was incredibly advanced, but also incredibly complex. Every system had multiple redundancies and fail-safes. The aliens had engineered out every possible point of failure. But in doing so, they had created a ship that required constant computer monitoring to function. On the 4th night, Morrison put his plan into action. He had been watching the guard named Zethic for 3 days. The alien was young and nervous. Unlike the veterans, he sometimes made small mistakes. In his routine, tonight, Zethic would make a bigger mistake. Morrison pretended to be sick. He collapsed in his cell and began convulsing. Zephyk hesitated, then followed protocol and called for medical assistance. But the medical team was busy with wounded soldiers. From the ongoing resistance on Earth, Zephyk faced a choice not covered by his training. Manuel, the young guard, made a human decision. He lowered the energy barrier and entered the cell to help the prisoner. Morrison struck with the speed and precision of a trained killer. His hand found the nerve cluster on Zephyk's neck that Lisa had identified from listening to alien medical discussions. The guard collapsed instantly. Morrison took Zephyk's weapon and uniform. The energy rifle felt strange in his hands, but the basic operation was simple enough: point and fire. The alien clothing was loose but functional. More importantly, it would fool the automated security systems long enough for him to reach his team. Freeing Lisa and Ryan took less than 2 minutes. The communications expert immediately began working on the ship's computer systems, while the demolition specialist gathered materials for improvised explosives. Morrison headed for the armory to find better weapons and equipment. The escape should have been impossible. 3 humans with no knowledge of alien technology should not have been able to infiltrate a starship crewed by hundreds of trained soldiers. But Morrison had learned something important during his capture. The Crexans were slaves to their own systems. Their security relied on technology instead of human intuition. Their guards followed checklists instead of trusting their instincts. Their computer systems were powerful but inflexible. Everything about their civilization prioritized efficiency over adaptability. Lisa proved this when she accessed their communication network. Instead of trying to break their encryption, she used their own protocols against them. She sent fake emergency signals that confused their automated systems. She triggered maintenance routines that shut down security cameras. She used their obsession with redundancy to create cascading failures throughout the ship. Ryan demonstrated the same principle with their physical systems. He did not try to understand their advanced technology. Instead, he found the simple physical connections that held everything together. A few improvised explosives in the right places could disable systems that had taken decades to design and build. The 3 humans moved through the ship like a virus in a computer system. They were small and seemingly harmless, but they disrupted everything they touched. Lights failed, doors malfunctioned, and communication systems reported false emergencies. The ship's computer brain struggled to process so many unexpected variables. Morrison led them toward the shuttle bay where they could steal a craft and return to Earth, but their route took them past the ship's central processing core. Ryan stopped and stared at the massive computer system that controlled the entire vessel. His demolitions training told him exactly where to place charges for maximum effect. Lisa accessed the navigation systems and downloaded star charts that would help human resistance forces plan future operations. Morrison found the ship's armory and gathered weapons that could be reverse-engineered by human scientists. They were not just escaping. They were gathering intelligence that would save lives. When they finally reached the shuttle bay, alarms were screaming throughout the ship. Crexan soldiers ran in confusion as their computers reported system failures everywhere. Morrison's team had been aboard for less than an hour, but they had turned the advanced starship into chaos. The stolen shuttle was designed for alien hands, but human adaptability compensated for the difference. Lisa figured out the basic controls, while Ryan prepared the engines and Morrison planned their escape route. They launched just as Crexan security forces reached the bay. As Earth grew larger in their view screen, Morrison allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They had proven something important. Human creativity and adaptability could overcome superior technology. The aliens had powerful tools, but humans were better at using tools creatively. More importantly, they had learned the enemy's greatest weakness. The Crexans had forgotten how to think for themselves. The stolen alien shuttle touched down in the ruins of what had been Chicago. Morrison stepped out into a world he barely recognized. Massive craters marked where Crexan energy weapons had struck. Twisted metal and broken concrete stretched in every direction. But among the destruction, he saw something that filled him with hope. Humans were fighting back. Lisa Carter worked frantically at her portable radio, trying to contact resistance cells across the planet. The equipment was a mixture of salvaged human technology and alien components they had stolen during their escape. Static filled the airwaves, but slowly voices began to respond. New York, Los Angeles, London, Tokyo, Moscow. In every major city, humans were organizing and striking back at their occupiers. The first voice to come through clearly belonged to Dr. Elena Rodriguez. The brilliant scientist was broadcasting from a hidden facility somewhere in the Rocky Mountains. Her team had been studying captured Crexan technology and making remarkable progress. Within weeks of the invasion, they had learned to modify alien energy weapons for human use. Rodriguez's voice was calm and professional as she shared her discoveries. The Crexan power cells could be adapted to human equipment. Their communication devices could be reprogrammed to avoid alien detection. Most importantly, their computer systems all used the same basic programming language. Once humans understood the patterns, they could begin to fight back on equal terms. Morrison contacted Rodriguez directly and arranged a meeting. But first, he needed to connect with other resistance leaders in the area. Ryan Knox had identified several potential base locations using intelligence gathered from the alien ship. Hidden underground facilities that the invaders had not yet discovered. Captain Tony Williams commanded one of those bases. The Air Force pilot had been shot down during the initial invasion, but survived to organize other military personnel. His group had established a network of hidden airfields where they repaired damaged aircraft and planned hit-and-run attacks on alien positions. Williams had learned something crucial about Crexan flight tactics. Their ships were faster and more powerful than human aircraft, but they flew in rigid formations that could be predicted and exploited. Human pilots who abandoned conventional tactics and embraced chaos could confuse and outmaneuver the alien squadrons. The captain had developed new combat techniques that his pilots called crazy flying. They would dive at impossible angles, change direction without warning, and attack from directions that made no tactical sense. The alien pilots, trained to respond to logical threats, could not adapt quickly enough to counter such unpredictable behavior. Morrison spent 2 days moving between resistance cells and learning how the war was progressing. What he discovered amazed him. Humans were not just surviving the occupation. They were adapting and evolving at an incredible rate. Each day brought new innovations and improvements to their fighting techniques. Dr. Rodriguez had reverse-engineered alien medical technology and developed treatments for energy weapon injuries. Her team had also created devices that could jam Crexan sensors and communication systems. But her greatest achievement was a modified computer virus that could disrupt alien ship operations without destroying them entirely. The virus was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to damage alien systems, it introduced random variables that required creative problem-solving to resolve. The Crexan computers could not adapt to unpredictable situations. Their advanced artificial intelligence was actually less flexible than the human brain. Captain Williams demonstrated this principle during a coordinated attack on an alien supply convoy. His pilots used the modified equipment to jam enemy sensors while ground teams led by Morrison struck the transport vehicles. The aliens had overwhelming firepower, but they could not use it effectively against targets they could not predict or track. The attack succeeded beyond their expectations. Not only did they capture valuable supplies and equipment, but they also rescued dozens of human prisoners. Among them was Professor Helen Clark, a computer specialist who had been working on quantum encryption before the invasion. Her knowledge would prove invaluable in the coming months. Clark immediately began working with Rodriguez to improve their computer warfare capabilities. She identified weaknesses in Crexan network security that could be exploited by human programmers. More importantly, she recognized that the aliens had built their entire civilization around the assumption that all intelligent beings thought logically. This was their fatal flaw. Human intuition, creativity, and willingness to try impossible solutions were completely outside their experience. They had conquered 47 worlds by fighting logical opponents who could be predicted and defeated through superior technology. But humans were not logical. Morrison organized a series of coordinated strikes designed to test this theory. Instead of attacking military targets, his teams hit seemingly random locations that made no strategic sense. A water treatment plant. Here, a shopping center there, a park in the middle of nowhere. The attacks appeared to follow no pattern. The Krexan response proved his point. Their military commanders spent days analyzing the strikes, trying to understand the human strategy. They moved troops to defend logical targets while the actual objectives remained unprotected. Their computer models could not process the concept of random violence that served no apparent purpose, but the strikes were not actually random. Each target had been carefully chosen to disrupt alien supply lines and communication networks in subtle ways. The water treatment plant controlled flow to a major alien base. The shopping center housed a hidden communication relay. The park covered an underground fiber optic cable that connected multiple alien facilities. Lisa Carter coordinated these operations from a mobile command center that moved constantly to avoid detection. She had learned to think like the alien computers, predicting their responses and staying one step ahead of their search patterns. Her team intercepted enemy communications and used their own protocols to spread false information. The psychological effect on the Krexan forces was profound. The soldiers began to question their own superiority. They had been taught that primitive species would crumble under the weight of advanced technology. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with each defeat. General Vorthak himself came down to Earth to investigate these developments. Morrison watched through stolen surveillance equipment as the alien commander toured the battle zones. The general's 4 eyes studied the destruction with obvious confusion. Nothing he saw matched his previous experience with conquered worlds. The resistance fighters had learned to use the aliens' own technology against them. Captured energy weapons powered human equipment. Stolen communication devices carried resistance messages. Even damaged alien vehicles were stripped for parts that could be used in improvised weapons and defensive systems. What disturbed Vorthak most was the speed of human adaptation. His own species had taken centuries to develop their current level of technology. But humans were mastering alien systems in weeks. They were not just copying Krexan designs. They were improving upon them and finding new applications that the original creators had never considered. Morrison decided it was time for a direct message to the alien general. He used Dr. Rodriguez's communication system to broadcast on all Krexan frequencies. His words were simple, but carried a weight that made Vorthak's blood freeze. The humans were not going to surrender. They were not going to be defeated. They were going to keep fighting and learning and adapting until they won. And when they won, they would remember every lesson the aliens had taught them. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stared at the quantum computer screen in her hidden laboratory deep beneath the Colorado mountains. 6 months of captured alien technology lay scattered across multiple workbenches, each piece carefully studied and reverse-engineered. But her latest discovery would change everything about the war. She had found the core weakness in Krexan civilization. Their entire society ran on automated systems that required perfect logical input to function properly. Every ship, every weapon, every communication device operated according to rigid programming that could not adapt to truly random variables. Rodriguez called Morrison to her laboratory to show him what she had developed. The device looked simple enough, a small black box with blinking lights and several data ports. But inside that box was a virus unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It would not destroy alien systems. Instead, it would force them to think creatively. The virus worked by introducing problems that had no logical solution. Krexan computers would receive data that required intuitive leaps and artistic thinking to process. When the machines inevitably failed, backup systems would trigger. But the backups would face the same impossible problems, creating a cascade of creative challenges throughout entire networks. Morrison understood the implications immediately. The aliens had built their empire on the assumption that all problems could be solved through logical analysis and superior firepower. They had never encountered a species that used chaos and creativity as weapons. This virus would force them to develop the very traits that made humans so dangerous. Captain Tony Williams arrived at the facility with news from the front lines. His pilots had been testing new combat techniques that pushed the boundaries of physics and common sense. They dove through asteroid fields at impossible speeds, used gravity wells to slingshot around planets, and attacked from angles that defied three-dimensional thinking. The alien pilots could not adapt to such tactics. Their training emphasized formation flying and coordinated attacks based on mathematical calculations. When faced with human pilots who abandoned all logical flight patterns, the advanced Krexan fighters became sitting targets for primitive human weapons. Williams had also brought disturbing intelligence about General Vorthak, the alien commander, had begun studying human history with obsessive intensity. He was reading about every major conflict humans had ever fought, analyzing their tactics and trying to understand their psychology. What Vorthak was discovering terrified him. Humans had a unique relationship with warfare that no other species shared. They did not fight to win territory or resources. They fought for abstract concepts like freedom and dignity. They would sacrifice everything, including their own lives, to protect ideas that could not be measured or quantified. The general had identified Jake Morrison as the key to understanding this phenomenon. Every report from occupied territories mentioned the human colonel. His name had become a symbol of resistance that inspired humans across the planet to keep fighting against impossible odds. Vorthak had ordered his intelligence teams to capture Morrison alive. He needed to understand how one primitive being could inspire an entire species to embrace destruction rather than accept defeat. The alien general was beginning to suspect that humans possessed something his own people had lost. Long ago, Professor Helen Clark had been working with Rodriguez to prepare for this development. They knew that Morrison would eventually face capture again, but this time it would be different. The aliens would try to break him psychologically instead of simply imprisoning him. Clark had developed a psychological profile of Krexan thinking, patterns based on intercepted communications and behavioral analysis. The aliens valued order above all else. They feared chaos and unpredictability because their entire civilization was built on the assumption that the universe followed logical rules. This gave humans a tremendous advantage. Every time they acted irrationally or made choices that defied logical analysis, they created stress fractures in the alien worldview. The more chaotic human behavior became, the more desperate the Krexans would grow to understand and control it. Morrison decided to test this theory by launching the most audacious operation of the war. Instead of hiding from Vorthak's forces, he would deliberately expose himself and force a direct confrontation. But he would do it in a way that challenged everything the aliens believed about warfare and strategy. The plan required perfect timing and coordination between all resistance cells. Rodriguez would deploy her virus simultaneously across multiple Krexan networks while Williams led a massive air assault on their orbital platforms. Meanwhile, Morrison would infiltrate Vorthak's flagship again, but this time his mission would be communication rather than destruction. Lisa Carter coordinated the operation from a mobile command center that moved constantly to avoid detection. She had learned to think like alien computers, predicting their responses and staying one step ahead of their analysis programs. Her broadcasts reached resistance fighters on every continent. The attack began at precisely noon, Greenwich Mean Time. Rodriguez's virus spread through Krexan networks like wildfire, introducing chaos into systems that had operated flawlessly for centuries. Alien commanders watched in horror as their computers began generating random data and requesting creative input for basic operations. Williams led his squadron in a suicidal assault on the orbital defense platforms. The human pilots flew in formations that made no tactical sense, using their ships as weapons when their ammunition ran out. They crashed into alien vessels with devastating effect, proving that human courage could overcome technological superiority on the ground. Resistance cells launched coordinated attacks on targets that appeared to have no strategic value. But each strike was carefully designed to support Morrison's infiltration of the alien flagship. Every explosion and every firefight served to distract and confuse the enemy forces. Morrison approached Vorthak's ship in a captured alien fighter, using identification codes that Lisa had stolen from their communication networks. The virus had disrupted their security systems enough to create gaps in their defenses. He landed in the shuttle bay without being detected, but instead of trying to sabotage the ship, Morrison walked directly to the bridge. He surrendered his weapons to the guards and requested a meeting with General Vorthak. The alien soldiers were confused by this behavior, but their protocols required them to escort important prisoners to their commander. Vorthak was waiting for him in the ship's command center. The alien general studied Morrison with his 4 eyes, trying to understand what drove this human to keep fighting when victory was impossible. The bridge fell silent as 2 representatives of different worlds faced each other. Morrison spoke first, his voice calm and steady despite the chaos erupting around them. He explained that humans were not fighting to win in any conventional sense. They were fighting to prove that some things were more important than survival. They would rather die free than live as slaves. The alien general listened in growing alarm as Morrison described the human concept of dignity. It was not something that could be measured or quantified. It could not be destroyed by superior weapons or replaced by advanced technology. It existed only in the minds and hearts of beings who chose to believe in it. Vorthak realized with growing horror that he was not fighting a military campaign. He was fighting an idea that could not be killed. Every human who died fighting for freedom would inspire 10 more to take their place. Every victory his forces achieved would only strengthen human resolve for the first time in his long military career. General Vorthak understood what it meant to fear an enemy. General Vorthak stood alone in his private quarters aboard the flagship, surrounded by holographic displays showing data from 47 conquered worlds. Each display represented a successful campaign, a defeated enemy, a civilization brought under Krexan control. But none of those victories had prepared him for what he was witnessing on Earth. The psychological reports from his field commanders painted a disturbing picture. Human resistance was not weakening after months of occupation. Instead, it was growing stronger and more sophisticated. Every defeat seemed to teach them new lessons that made them more dangerous in the next encounter. What troubled Vorthak most was the pattern he had discovered in human behavior. Every species the Krexans had conquered followed predictable psychological responses to overwhelming force. First came denial, then anger, then bargaining, and finally acceptance. But humans appeared to skip the final stage entirely. Dr. Rodriguez's virus had spread through 70% of the Krexan fleet, creating chaos in systems that had operated flawlessly for generations. Alien technicians struggled to repair computers that were asking them to compose poetry and paint pictures. Their logical minds could not process such requests, leaving entire ships paralyzed. But the virus was more than just a weapon. It was a message that demonstrated the fundamental difference between human and Krexan thinking. Where aliens saw problems that needed logical solutions, humans saw opportunities for creative expression. The same chaotic thinking that paralyzed alien computers made humans more adaptable and resourceful. Captain Williams had proven this during his assault on the orbital platforms. His pilots had achieved the impossible by abandoning all conventional tactics and embracing pure chaos. They flew in patterns that defied physics and attacked from directions that made no mathematical sense. The alien defenders, trained to respond to logical threats, were helpless against such unpredictable behavior. Vorthak studied the tactical recordings of that battle with growing unease. The human pilots had not simply ignored the laws of physics. They had found ways to use those laws creatively, turning scientific principles into weapons. They used gravity wells as slingshots, asteroid fields as cover, and their own ship explosions as guidance systems for follow-up attacks. The general's analysis revealed something that chilled him to his core. Humans were not just adapting to alien technology. They were evolving in real time, developing new capabilities that had never existed before in their species. The pressure of total war was forcing them to transcend their own limitations. Jake Morrison had demonstrated this during their conversation on the bridge. The human colonel had spoken with a calm confidence that suggested he knew something Vorthak did not. When pressed for details about human strategy, Morrison had smiled and said that humans had no strategy in any conventional sense. They simply refused to accept defeat. This concept was alien to Crexan thinking. Every military campaign required clear objectives, logical planning, and measurable outcomes. But humans seemed to fight for abstract principles that could not be quantified or destroyed. They valued freedom and dignity more than their own survival. Vorthak had ordered his xenopsychology team to study human culture and history for insights into this behavior. What they discovered was deeply disturbing. Throughout their evolutionary development, humans had faced extinction-level threats that should have destroyed them. But instead of being broken by these challenges, they had used them as opportunities to become something greater. The Ice Age had forced them to develop tools and fire. Natural disasters had taught them to build cities and civilizations. Diseases had driven them to discover medicine and science. Wars had pushed them to create art and philosophy. Every catastrophe in human history had resulted in a leap forward. In their development, this pattern suggested that humans thrived on adversity in ways that no other known species could match. While most civilizations sought stability and order, humans seemed to require chaos and challenge to reach their full potential. The Crexan invasion was not breaking them. It was forcing them to evolve. The evidence was everywhere in the reports from occupied territories. Human resistance fighters were displaying capabilities that exceeded their previous limitations. They moved faster, thought more clearly, and fought with a ferocity that bordered on supernatural. Some alien soldiers reported that humans seemed to anticipate attacks before they happened. Dr. Clark's computer analysis had identified the source of these improvements. Human neural networks were adapting to process information at accelerated rates under extreme stress. Their brains were literally rewiring themselves to handle the demands of total war. What should have caused psychological breakdown was instead triggering enhanced cognitive function. Captain Carter's communication intercepts revealed that humans were sharing knowledge and innovations across the globe at unprecedented speeds. New weapons designs, tactical innovations, and technological breakthroughs were spreading through the resistance network faster than Crexan intelligence could track them. But the most disturbing development was the change in human psychology itself. Vorthak's analysts reported that occupied populations were displaying increased levels of cooperation, creativity, and determination. The alien invasion had not divided humanity. It had united them in ways they had never achieved during peacetime. Morrison had hinted at this during their meeting. He suggested that humans had always possessed the potential for greatness, but had never been forced to fully realize it. The Crexan threat was serving as a catalyst that was transforming the entire species into something unprecedented. General found himself studying Morrison's personnel file obsessively. The human colonel had been an exceptional soldier before the invasion, but his recent accomplishments defied explanation. He had escaped from maximum security detention, infiltrated an advanced starship multiple times, and inspired a global resistance movement that was bringing a galactic empire to its knees. What terrified Vorthak was the realization that Morrison was not unique among humans. Reports from around the globe described similar individuals emerging in every resistance cell. Teachers becoming master tacticians, farmers developing advanced weapons, children solving complex technological problems that stumped alien scientists. The pattern suggested that every human possessed the potential to become extraordinary under the right circumstances. The Crexan invasion was providing those circumstances on a planetary scale. They were not just fighting a primitive species. They were fighting the emergence of something entirely new. Vorthak's worst fears were confirmed when he received reports from his deep space scouts. Human refugees who had escaped Earth before the invasion were sharing their knowledge with other species across the galaxy. The ideas and technologies developed during the resistance were spreading beyond Earth itself. More disturbing still were the psychological changes observed in alien populations that had contact with human refugees. Species that had been conquered and pacified for generations were beginning to show signs of unrest. The human concept of freedom was proving to be contagious. For the first time in his military career, General Vorthak was forced to consider the possibility of defeat. not because his forces lacked firepower or technology, but because they were fighting an enemy that grew stronger with each passing day. An enemy that turned every challenge into an opportunity for growth. The human species was evolving before his eyes, and he had no idea what they might become. The final confrontation began not with weapons or explosions, but with a simple transmission that reached every Crexan ship in the fleet. Jake Morrison's voice carried across the void of space, calm and steady despite the chaos erupting around him. His message was brief but carried the weight of an entire species' determination. He was aboard Vorthok's flagship again. But this time he had not come alone. Dr. Rodriguez had perfected her virus into something far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. The device Morrison carried would not destroy the alien fleet. Instead, it would free the individual Crexan soldiers from their rigid command structure. For the first time in centuries, Lisa Carter coordinated the operation from orbit, her communication network now spanning multiple star systems as human refugees shared their knowledge with other species. Captain Williams led a final desperate assault that was designed not to win, but to provide cover for Morrison's true mission. The Crexan mothership shuddered under the impact of human fighters crashing into its hull. Williams and his pilots had embraced the ultimate expression of human determination, using their own vessels as guidance systems for follow-up attacks. They struck with surgical precision, disabling defensive systems while avoiding areas that housed civilian personnel. Morrison moved through the ship's corridors like a man walking through his own home. He had studied the vessel's layout during his previous infiltrations and knew exactly where to go. But his destination was not the bridge or the weapon systems. He was heading for the central computer core that controlled the minds of every Crexan aboard. The alien crew he encountered seemed different now. Months of fighting humans had changed them in subtle ways. They hesitated before following orders that made no tactical sense. They questioned commands that would result in unnecessary casualties. The rigid discipline that had made them effective. Conquerors was beginning to crack. Vorthok was waiting for him in the computer core chamber. The alien general stood before the massive processing units that controlled every aspect of Crexan military operations. His 4 eyes reflected the blinking lights of the machines that had guided his people for so long. The conversation that followed would determine the fate of 2 civilizations. Morrison spoke of the human discovery that true strength came not from superior technology or overwhelming force, but from the ability to choose hope over despair and creativity over conformity. He explained that freedom was not something that could be given or taken away, but something that existed in the minds of beings brave enough to claim it. Vorthok listened with growing understanding as Morrison described the transformation that had occurred on Earth. Humans had not simply resisted the invasion. They had used it as an opportunity to become something greater than they had ever been before. Every challenge had pushed them to evolve and adapt in ways that exceeded their previous limitations. The alien general revealed his greatest fear. His own species had once possessed the same creative spirit that made humans so dangerous. But centuries of technological dependence and rigid social structure had bred that spark out of them. The Crexans had become prisoners of their own success, unable to think beyond the parameters of their programming. Morrison activated Rodriguez's device, but instead of using it to cripple the alien systems, he used it to offer them a choice. The virus spread through the ship's network, not destroying the computers but freeing them from their logical constraints. For the first time in generations, Crexan minds were forced to think creatively. The effect was immediate and profound. Throughout the ship, alien soldiers began to question orders that had never been questioned before. They made decisions based on intuition rather than protocol. They chose to protect civilians instead of following tactical doctrine. They became individuals instead of components in a vast machine. Captain Carter's data indicated that the transformation was spreading beyond the flagship to the entire fleet. Crexan ships began withdrawing from combat zones where human civilians were at risk. Alien commanders refused orders that would result in unnecessary destruction. The rigid military structure that had conquered 47 worlds was dissolving. from within. But the most remarkable change occurred in General Vorthak himself. Faced with the choice between following his programming or embracing the chaos of free will, he made the most human decision possible. He chose to help Morrison evacuate the alien civilians before the ship's power core failed under the strain of Rodriguez's virus. The general's final transmission to Morrison acknowledged the truth that had driven his fear from the beginning. Humans were indeed something to be feared, not because they were stronger or more advanced, but because they never stopped growing and never stopped believing that impossible things could become possible. As the Krexan fleet withdrew from Earth's solar system, both species were forever changed. The aliens carried with them the virus of human creativity and determination. Scattered across the galaxy, they would begin the slow process of rediscovering what they had lost. Some would choose to embrace chaos and growth. Others would cling to their old ways and gradually fade into irrelevance. The humans who watched the alien ships disappear into hyperspace knew that they had won something far more valuable than a military victory. They had proven that the power of the human spirit could overcome any challenge, no matter how overwhelming it might seem. They had shown that evolution was not a gradual process that took millions of years, but something that could happen in a single generation when survival demanded it. Morrison stood on the bridge of the captured alien vessel and looked out at the stars. Earth was safe, but the galaxy was vast and full of wonders waiting to be discovered. Humanity had taken its first step toward becoming something greater than anyone had ever imagined. The war was over, but the real adventure was just beginning. Dr. Rodriguez transmitted the final data packet to human colonies across the galaxy. Her virus was not just a weapon or a tool of liberation. It was a gift that would spread the human spark to every species willing to embrace it. The age of rigid order and logical oppression was ending. The age of creative chaos and unlimited potential had begun. The alien general who had feared one human had learned the truth that would reshape the galaxy. Fear was not something to be eliminated or controlled. It was something to be embraced and transformed into the driving force behind growth and evolution. Humanity had taught him that the greatest victories came not from conquering others, but from conquering the limitations within oneself. As the last Krexan ship vanished into the darkness between stars, Jake Morrison smiled and began planning humanity's next impossible achievement.